was convinced I would walk off the stage, so I'm glad I went the correct way. So I'm going to present sort of a small-scale perspective to sort of the Elsevier approach and talk a little bit about how, because we currently don't have our own platform and are not alone in this, sort of how we've then worked together with aggregators and sort of what our transition has been to experimenting with some models, and more recently that is moving into some DRM-free, which is, on the one hand, obviously unlimited user, but then also the copy-pasting and functionality aspects. So I think there are a number of reasons why one should do this, or think about doing this, or experiment with this. There's the practical reason, which I initially had called moral or ethical, which felt a little judgy, but I still want to judge and say that I think it is moral and ethical, and publishers need to think a little bit about that. I'll get to that next. And then strategic, obviously. I'll go through some of those points, and then economic when all else fails. So to start from the practical point of view, it really is about the role of the publisher in disseminating research. And I think this is an area where, we've taken all the limitations of print and now applied it to E. Of course, I'm reading from paper notes, and I probably should be using an iPad to really drive this point home, that we should be making the most of technology and using it. And I think in this respect, it's sort of also the researcher experience and thinking about how they're needing to function in research. And for me also, this was actually driven some years ago, because when I'm not twiddling my thumbs at Berkon, I'm trying to finish my PhD, so I put on my student hat and hack into a library and see how all the platforms are doing, and then and it's just impossible to try and do research, use the ebooks. You can't copy and paste, you're having to retype all of your citations, and so ultimately you wonder why we get stuck with plagiarism, self-plagiarism, poor citations. I mean, we're just not making it easy for our researchers, who are pressured to, as we know, produce, publish at an extreme level and an ever-increasing level. So we have the technology to do that, so how do we think about making that possible? I think especially it was driven by this paranoia of piracy, and frankly I would be flattered if someone wanted to pirate our books so much as to copy and paste an entire book and throw it somewhere online. So there's that aside, there's then obviously the strategic side. There is keeping our librarians happy, because as we've all heard, they hate to have to deal with explaining why their patrons can't use content in different ways. And I think there are also ways to sort of be responsive, think a little bit. I mean, it's risky, of course. I think experimenting, we for the longest time resisted going into unlimited, because for us it was a challenge for thinking about our books, which are generally primarily scholarly monographs and collections, and what impact this would have for course adoptions and that sort of thing. But I think there are many ways that thinking about new models and experimenting are good also for your profile. It's also good to kind of get you out there and show also for your authors and for your partners and various things that you are also interested in thinking about, being a little bit forward-thinking. And when all else fails, there's also the economic reason. So if you're not moved by those motivations, then ultimately there are actually very real financial benefits from that. Within limits, of course. I don't think it can vary, obviously. And I think for us, what was interesting to see, not so much that obviously, Kara showed that there are ways that Unlimited is bringing in a lot more revenue for publishers, but I think for us it was just about also accessibility and discoverability, and the next slides will show you sort of some data of what we saw with some of the models and how our unleashing of Unlimited, what that did for our overall income over a period of a year or 2 years, can't remember now, we'll see it in a minute, and sort of what that has done, and came away with some interesting conclusions that we hadn't maybe expected. So to look at the stats, so essentially these are stats from, we work with obviously also a wide range of aggregators. And this is just using two of our sort of large partner aggregators where they have multiple models. So this is just a portion of our ebook sales over time, but just to show sort of the shifts that we've been seeing when we also introduced Unlimited. So we have another platform we work very closely with and do very well with, where it's only Unlimited. So I haven't included that here because the point is really just to show the shift in models. So year by year, and then also as we unleashed Unlimited and really pushed it also in partnership with our various platforms to really make a big thing about the fact that we had moved to DRM-free, or essentially starting off with Unlimited and then to DRM-3. And I think there to show sort of obviously what that did to the 3-user model, which was always a peculiar creature anyway, but ultimately also what it's done for our single-user model, which is sort of the point that's kind of coming out of this presentation. And this just shows you over time what happened to the different user models that we had. And so you can see the little tick, which is where we had a big sort of launching of our Unlimited and what that did for income units. And then interestingly, what's happening now after that moment, which is this kind of everything's still moving in the right direction, which is up, which is great. But as you can see here, librarians aren't even given the option, they're still opting for single user, because also we publish scholarly monographs, and for most of our books, that is the most appropriate model. I would be happy if everybody was trying to read them all at once, but the reality is they're slightly specialized, which is an understatement. But what we're seeing ultimately is that single users is really increased because our discoverability is increased, because through various profiles of libraries who want to see and have access to various books, we're now more available and more discoverable, but yet they're still now making the pricing decision, because there is a differential, to actually instead go for the single user. So it's been an interesting experiment in that side of things. And above all, what's been especially exciting for us, and this is now data coming from our other platform with whom we work, where it's only Unlimited is offered, is what this has done for our market shares, so our market sort of availability. The regional is probably relatively close to our print distribution, the exception being Australia, which is pretty pathetic in print, and Europe obviously makes up for all of that and more some. But what's especially exciting for us has been access into institutions that we otherwise aren't selling our print into, because again, it's high-level specialized collections, and we're not making it, our profiles are not showing up in especially the smaller and medium-sized lower-tier colleges. I mean, we really are the kind of ARLs, Tier 1 university libraries. So this was, for us, what was most exciting out of this. It really got us into colleges that we would otherwise never get into. And that for us, for our authors, that's a great thing to see the books more available, and also in parts of the world that they otherwise wouldn't be. So basically, some concluding thoughts in terms of what have we learned from this. We've definitely learned that when given an option, librarians want options. They want to be able to make educated decisions and make those decisions based on what they're hearing from their patrons, obviously what their budgets can do. So I think there are a couple of things of what it says for sort of your platform partnerships and how to work with them. And I think ebooks have been really great for the amount of visibility and relationships we have. I mean, I can never imagine talking to Baker and Taylor the way, now or even years ago, the way we do with our ebook partners. I mean, there's a real sense of collaborative working together. And so they're sort of thinking a little bit about what our role is, what the platform's role is, and how to mitigate some of the downsides, which is how do we then make sure we're still in touch with our librarians, communicating different models, triggers for DDA. I mean, there are a lot of things that I think it's hard to figure out where the responsibility lies in sort of easing up some of those pain points. And I think that's where working with your platform is really important to sort of address those. Obviously, cannibalization of print right now, print and e for us are continuing to grow, so we haven't yet seen that flip, but it's just a matter of time. Price points, obviously, Unlimited books obviously have a higher price, so at what point does that become a problem? I mean, for now, it means it's being converted into single user, but that could change. And then finally, title selection. So which titles work best? I think adoptions, especially for the kinds of books that we do, it's very hard. Often we don't know that a book will be adopted until much later on. It also depends on the region. A book that is appropriate for an adoption in Scandinavia would never be picked up in the US, and sort of vice versa and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks.